My sister crashed my new car, then smirked. Mom and Dad will make you forgive me. They tried until I pulled out the insurance report. Suddenly, she wasn't smiling anymore because she had no idea what I had done behind her back. I had spent years saving every extra dollar, skipping vacations, ignoring impulse purchases, and driving my beat-up old sedan into the ground just to finally afford the one thing I had always wanted, a brand new car that was completely mine, paid for with my own hard-earned money. The moment I signed the paperwork and the dealer handed me the keys, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, pure, unfiltered pride in myself. I ran my fingers along the smooth, gleaming hood, inhaled the intoxicating scent of fresh leather seats, and thought, this is mine. Every single part of it is mine. I had barely owned the car for a full day before my younger sister Jamie decided that my happiness was hers for the taking. Jimmy, who had been coddled and spoiled her entire life, had never worked for anything, never taken responsibility, and never faced a consequence that our parents couldn't sweep under the rug. She was the kind of person who treated other people's things as if they were hers by default, because that was the way life had always worked for her. When I pulled into our parents' driveway that evening to show them the car, Jamie was already there, leaning against the garage with that lazy, self-satisfied smirk she always wore. She barely even looked up from her phone as I parked. "Nice ride," she said, pushing herself off the wall and strolling over, peering through the driver's side window like she had already decided it belonged to her. "What's the mileage?" "Less than 100, I said, forcing myself to sound neutral, even though I could already feel my patience wearing thin. Jimmy let out a low whistle, nodding appreciatively. Then, without asking, she reached for the handle and pulled the door open. "Let me take it for a spin." I immediately moved to shut the door before she could climb in, shaking my head firmly. "No way. I just got it. You're not driving it." Jamie rolled her eyes like I had just told her she couldn't borrow $1. "Oh, come on, Annie. Don't be such a control freak. It's just a car." "Exactly," I snapped. "It's just a car that I paid for with my own money. You don't get to take it." But Jamie had never been the kind of person to hear no and accept it. She just grinned, gave a little shrug, and backed away. But something about her expression sent a warning chill down my spine, like she already had a backup plan in motion. I should have trusted my instincts. Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video, thank you. Later that night, I left my car keys on the entryway table for just a few minutes while I went upstairs to grab something from my room. When I came back down, the keys were gone, and so was my car. My hands clenched into fists as realization sank in. Jamie. I stormed outside, my heart hammering, but by then she was long gone, tires squealing in the distance. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail, again and again. I was still fuming when 2 hours later my phone finally rang, but it wasn't Jim's number, it was an unknown caller. I answered, already bracing myself. "Ms. Anderson," a deep voice, calm but serious. "This is Officer Reynolds with the County Police Department. I'm calling regarding a vehicle registered under your name." I felt my stomach drop. "What happened?" "There's been an accident." A pause. "The driver is unharmed, but the vehicle sustained significant damage." My grip on the phone tightened. "Who was driving?" The officer hesitated for only a second before answering. "A young woman who identified herself as Jamie Anderson. I don't even remember driving to the scene of the crash. One moment I was standing in my parents' entryway, gripping my phone with white knuckles, and the next I was pulling up behind flashing police lights, my pulse a steady drum of rage. And there she was, my sister, standing next to what was left of my brand new car, arms crossed, looking completely unfazed. The front bumper was destroyed, the hood crumpled in on itself, and one of the headlights was shattered. My beautiful, perfect car was ruined, and Jimmy, was standing there like it was nothing. I climbed out of my old beater, slamming the door harder than I meant to, my hands shaking as I marched up to her. "What the hell did you do?" Jimmy finally turned to face me, and then, in the single most infuriating moment of my entire life, she smirked. "That sucks," she said, shrugging like she had just dropped my ice cream cone instead of wrecking my car. "But hey, don't freak out. Mom and Dad will make you forgive me." I felt the words hit me like a slap across the face. Mom and Dad will make me forgive her. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what she had done. It was a smug, arrogant declaration that no matter how angry I was, no matter how much damage she had caused, it wouldn't matter because our parents would smooth it over just like they always did. I took a slow, measured breath, my fists clenched at my sides, my pulse thundering in my ears. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her get away with it this time. Not this time. Have you ever had a sibling who thought they could get away with anything? Let me know in the comments because I was done letting it slide. I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache, my body still tense from the sheer frustration of the night before, my mind replaying every single detail of that awful encounter at the crash site, my sister's smirking face haunting me like a nightmare that refused to end. My car, my beautiful, hard-earned, brand-new car, was gone, destroyed in an instant by someone who had never worked a day in her life, someone who had never faced a single consequence, someone who genuinely believed that my anger was nothing more than an inconvenience to her day. I knew before I even stepped out of bed that my parents would be calling me, that they would be demanding a conversation, that they would try to smooth this over like they always did, as if Jim's actions were just another minor mistake that we could all forget about if I would only be reasonable, like a good daughter should. Sure enough, the moment I checked my phone, I saw 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and a text message from Jamie that was so breathtakingly arrogant, I had to read it twice just to believe my own eyes. Stop being dramatic, Annie. It's just a car. Mom and Dad said we'll figure it out, so quit acting like it's the end of the world. There was no apology, no remorse, not even the slightest acknowledgement that she had done something wrong, just pure entitlement dripping from every word, as if the real problem wasn't that she had stolen and crashed my property, but that I had dared to make a big deal out of it. I swallowed my rage, forcing myself to breathe slowly, reminding myself that getting worked up over a text message wouldn't help me now. Jamie had always been this way, and I knew exactly where she had learned it. I drove to my parents' house, my knuckles white against the steering wheel of my ancient backup car, my stomach twisting with a mix of anger and exhaustion, already knowing exactly how this conversation was going to go. I walked in without knocking, not bothering with pleasantries, finding my parents sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, their expressions a perfect mixture of forced concern and thinly veiled exasperation, as if I were the problem here, as if my reaction was the thing that needed to be fixed. Jamie sat slouched in one of the chairs, scrolling through her phone, looking completely unbothered, like she was waiting for this whole thing to blow over so she could move on with her life while I was left to pick up the pieces of what she had ruined. Mom sighed heavily, setting down her coffee cup like she was already exhausted by my presence, rubbing her temples as if she were the victim in all of this. Annie, honey, we need to talk about this situation because this anger you're holding on to isn't healthy for anyone. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something quiet but dangerous, a slow burning fury that I had carried for years but had never fully allowed myself to acknowledge until now. My anger, I repeated, my voice unnervingly calm, my hands resting on the back of an empty chair, gripping the wood so tightly that my fingers ached. You think my anger is the problem here? Mom let out a long sigh, exchanging a quick glance with Dad, their silent communication making it painfully clear that they were united in this, that their decision had already been made before I'd even walked through the door. Sweetheart, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. It's just a car. Jimmy didn't mean to crash it, and we don't think it's fair to punish her so harshly for something that was clearly an accident. I felt something inside me snap, something that had been held together by sheer force of will for years, something that had been stretched and pulled and torn one too many times. She stole it, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, because if I let myself feel anything, I knew I would explode. I told her no. She took my keys anyway. She stole my car, wrecked it, and then smirked in my face because she knew you would cover for her, just like you always do. Jamie let out a dramatic sigh, finally looking up from her phone, rolling her eyes like this entire conversation was beneath her. Jesus, sis, you're acting like I murdered someone, she muttered, shaking her head, her arrogance radiating off her in waves. I made a mistake, okay. Chill out. Dad reached out, placing a gentle hand on mine, his eyes pleading, his expression carefully crafted into something that looked like love, but was really just manipulation wrapped in a prettier package. "Annie, you're her sister," he said softly, tilting his head like he was speaking to a toddler in need of correction. "I know you're upset, but family forgives, sweetheart. That's what we do. We forgive each other." I stared at him, at the sheer audacity of those words, at the way he had so effortlessly placed the responsibility on me to fix what Jamie had done. Like my feelings were an inconvenience, like my hard work meant nothing. Like my sacrifices didn't matter as long as Jamie was happy. I realized in that moment that I had spent my entire life being conditioned to accept this treatment, to believe that my needs came second, that my anger was unjustified, that my pain was something I had to swallow quietly for the sake of keeping the family peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into submission this time. So I did something I'd never done before. I smiled. It was small, just a flicker of amusement, but it was enough to make my father pause, enough to make Jamie glance at me with something almost resembling suspicion. "You know what?" I said, my voice light, my expression deceptively calm, because I had already made up my mind. "You're absolutely right, Dad. Family forgives, and I don't want to hold on to this anger anymore." I watched as relief flooded their faces, as Jimmy's smirk returned, as they all leaned back in their chairs, convinced that they had won, that they had successfully broken me down into the version of myself that they preferred. But they had no idea what I was planning. They had no idea that, behind my pleasant smile and my easy agreement, I was already putting things in motion. I was going to make Jamie pay for what she did. She just didn't know it yet. I had spent my entire life being told that family comes first, that forgiveness is a virtue, that holding grudges only leads to bitterness. But as I sat in my car outside the insurance office, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, I realized that those rules had only ever applied to me. Jamie had never been expected to forgive or compromise or sacrifice, because Jaime had never faced real consequences, not once, not ever, not in all the years she had coasted through life on a wave of other people cleaning up her messes. But that was about to change, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. When I walked into the insurance office, the air conditioning blasted against my skin, a stark contrast to the fire simmering in my chest, the calculated rage that had been fueling me since the moment Jamie had sneered in my face and told me our parents would make me forgive her. The man at the desk barely looked up as he typed something into his computer. His voice clipped and professional as he asked how he could help. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before speaking, knowing that once I set this in motion, there would be no going back. "I need to file a claim for my car," I said, keeping my tone even, my expression carefully neutral. He nodded, clicking a few more times before glancing up at me. "Was it an accident? Do you have a police report?" "Yes, there's a report," I said, my pulse steady, my decision unwavering, and I need to report it as unauthorized use. That made him pause. He blinked once, tilting his head slightly as if trying to determine whether he had misheard me. "Unauthorized use," he repeated, his voice laced with a note of curiosity. "Are you saying your vehicle was Saint?" I could have said yes, but I knew better than to lie outright, especially when the truth was just as damning. "I never gave permission for her to take it," I clarified, choosing my words carefully, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. "I explicitly told her she couldn't drive my car, and she took it anyway. That's theft, isn't it?" The man hesitated for only a second before nodding slowly, typing something into his system, his gaze flicking toward the screen as he read through what I assumed were company policies on situations like this. "If you can provide proof that you denied her permission and she took the vehicle regardless, then yes, this qualifies as unauthorized use." I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone, my fingers moving swiftly as I pulled up the text messages from Jamie. The ones where I had told her no, the ones where she had laughed it off like my words meant nothing. I turned the screen toward him, watching as he read over the messages, his eyebrows raising slightly before he nodded again. "This should be sufficient," he said, his voice now purely professional, his fingers moving over the keyboard with precision. "Since you're filing for unauthorized use, the liability will not fall on you. It will transfer to the driver. Jamie." The liability would transfer to Jamie. The reality of it sank in slowly, like warm honey drizzling over the cold steel of my fury, coating it in something rich and satisfying. Jamie, who had spent her entire life escaping responsibility, would finally have to answer for something. Jamie, who had laughed in my face and told me I would have to forgive her, was about to learn what it felt like when the world didn't bend to her will. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though inside my heart was thrumming with a strange, unfamiliar thrill. The man glanced at his screen, adjusting his glasses before answering. "Well, given the extent of the damage, the estimated total she'll be responsible for is somewhere between $30 and $40,000. $30 to $40,000, I exhaled slowly, absorbing the number, letting it roll over me like a wave of pure vindication. Jamie had never had to deal with anything more than a slap on the wrist, never had to truly face the weight of her actions. But now that weight was about to come crashing down on her, and I wasn't going to lift a single finger to stop it. By the time I walked out of the office, the sun was shining brighter, the air felt crisper, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt good, I felt powerful, I felt free. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through social media, my eyes narrowing as I landed on Jamie's latest post, a picture of her and her friends at a bar, drinks in hand, her caption as arrogant as ever, "Tough day, but nothing a few drinks can't fix. Some people need to chill out and move on. Life's too short to stress about little things." Little things. That was what she called it. The sheer audacity of it sent a ripple of laughter through me, a sound so foreign that it startled me for a moment before I leaned back against the couch, shaking my head in amusement. Jamie thought she had won. She thought this was over. She thought our parents had bailed her out once again, that everything was going to go back to normal, that I had simply swallowed my anger and moved on like I always had before. But what Jimmy didn't know, what she wouldn't know until that insurance claim finished processing, was that this time I wasn't letting it go. This time, Jimmy was going to learn the hard way, and by the time she realized what I had done, it would already be too late. Sitting at the dinner table, I could already feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, thick and suffocating, as if they had collectively decided that tonight would be the night I finally fell back in line. My father had set the table like it was a holiday gathering, candles flickering in their holders, the smell of roasted chicken and buttery mashed potatoes filling the air, his way of making it clear that this was meant to be a family moment, a night of reconciliation, a scene carefully crafted to smooth over what they viewed as an unnecessary conflict. My mother sat at the head of the table, her usual presence commanding but relaxed, her expression giving nothing away. But I knew exactly why we were here, why this meal had been planned so soon after the accident, why Jimmy sat across from me with that insufferable smirk stretched across her face, her phone resting next to her plate as if she couldn't be bothered to pretend this mattered to her at all. I could feel it coming, the inevitable conversation they had all rehearsed in their heads, the carefully chosen words they would use to convince me that my anger was inconvenience rather than justified, that my reaction was exaggerated rather than appropriate, that Jamie deserved my forgiveness simply because she was family. But as I sat there, my hands resting in my lap, a thick envelope pressed between my fingers beneath the table, I felt nothing but an eerie sense of calm, because unlike them, I already knew how this dinner was going to end. Jamie was the first to speak, her voice dripping with the kind of arrogance that had been nurtured since childhood, her words laced with condescension, her smirk widening as she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed over her chest. "So, have you calmed down, or are you still planning to throw a tantrum over a stupid car?" The words barely registered, barely stirred anything inside me, because I had already expected them, already prepared for the way she would turn this into a joke, already knew that she would try to make me look like the unreasonable one in front of our parents. I simply tilted my head, offering her a small, unreadable smile, watching as her confidence grew in the face of what she assumed was submission, watching as my parents exchanged relieved glances, believing foolishly that they had won, My father let out a dramatic sigh, the kind that was meant to sound exasperated but gentle, as if he were taking on the exhausting role of mediator, as if he were the only one with the patience to deal with me. Annie, sweetheart, I know this has been a stressful situation for you, but we really need to put this behind us as a family. Jimmy made a mistake, but you holding on to this anger isn't going to fix anything. My mother, ever the voice of reason, ever the woman who prided herself on being level-headed and pragmatic, nodded along as she cut into her chicken, speaking without even looking up from her plate. Life is too short to get caught up in things like this, Annie. At the end of the day, it's just a car. Things can be replaced. Family can't. I could feel the satisfaction radiating off Jamie, could practically see the way she was relishing in my supposed defeat, her ego inflating with every passing second, her smirk growing more insufferable by the minute. She picked up her fork, twirling it between her fingers, shaking her head with mock disappointment. Seriously, sis, you need to chill. I swear you've always been like this, overreacting, making everything a huge deal. I mean, come on. I cracked a car, not your entire life. You'll get over it. It was in that moment, as she let out an amused chuckle, as my father reached across the table to place a reassuring hand over mine, as my mother gave a small nod of approval at Jim's words, that I finally moved. I reached beneath the table, pulled the envelope into view, and placed it directly in front of Jimmy with deliberate precision, the sound of thick paper hitting the polished wood loud enough to make all three of them pause. Jamie barely spared it a glance, her smirk still firmly in place as she shook her head, rolling her eyes like I was being dramatic, like whatever I was about to do couldn't possibly be worth her time. What's this? Some angry letter about how I hurt your feelings. Read it, I said simply, my voice even, my expression unreadable. Something in my tone must have caught her attention because for the first time that night her amusement wavered, her smirk faltering just slightly as she reached for the envelope, fingers hesitating for only a second before tearing it open. The moment she pulled out the papers, the moment her eyes scanned the words printed across the top, the color drained from her face so quickly that it was almost satisfying to watch, almost poetic in its irony. I watched in silence as her hands tightened around the pages, as her mouth opened and closed without sound, as her entire posture shifted from smug arrogance to quiet, dawning horror. My father frowned, glancing between us with confusion, his hand still resting near mine, his grip tightening slightly. Annie, what is this? Jim's voice was barely a whisper, her fingers gripping the document so tightly that the edges crumpled under the pressure. What did you do? I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable, just long enough for the weight of reality to settle onto Jim's shoulders before I finally spoke, my voice calm, measured, almost gentle. That, dear sister, is the finalized insurance report, the one that officially transfers full liability to you. The air shifted instantly, thick with tension, suffocating in its weight, the sudden realization hitting my parents like a slap across the face. My mother finally looked up from her plate, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, her eyes sharp, calculating, trying to piece together what had just happened, trying to understand how Jimmy had gone from untouchable to responsible. My father pulled his hand away, flipping through the papers with growing panic, his breath hitching as he processed what this meant, as he read the numbers printed clearly in bold ink. Jimmy, for the first time in her life, looked afraid, and I had never felt more satisfied in my entire existence. Jim's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she pushed back from the table with enough force to rattle the silverware, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts, her face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and fury, her hands gripping the insurance papers so tightly that they crumpled under her fingers. She stood there for a moment, her chest rising and falling as she stared at me with something that looked almost like betrayal, as if I had somehow wronged her by refusing to roll over and accept what she had done, as if the real crime here was not her recklessness, not her entitlement, not her theft, but my audacity in making her face the consequences of her actions. Her voice was tight when she finally spoke, low and furious, shaking with barely contained rage. "This isn't funny, Annie. Tell me you're joking." I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us, watching as panic flickered across her face, watching as she looked from me to our parents, like she was expecting them to step in and fix this before it spiraled out of control. My father's lips were slightly parted, his fingers clutching at the fabric of his shirt, his eyes darting across the papers in front of him as if searching for a loophole, a way out, some piece of information that would make this all go away. My mother, ever the composed one, took a deep breath and placed her hands flat against the table, her voice measured, calm, but laced with something dangerously close to frustration. "Annie," she said, her gaze sharp, heavy with expectation, the way it always was when she wanted me to fold. "This is going too far. You're punishing your sister in a way that isn't just cruel, it's vindictive." Jimmy let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow, forced, her fingers running through her hair as she turned away from the table, pacing like a caged animal, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is insane. You're actually trying to ruin my life over a goddamn car." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest, my expression unreadable, my voice steady. "No, Jamie, I'm not ruining your life. I'm just not cleaning up your mess this time." My father inhaled sharply, his hand flying to his chest like I had physically struck him, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that I was refusing to play the role they'd assigned me since childhood. The role of the responsible one, the one who forgave, the one who smoothed things over, the one who made the sacrifices so that Jamie never had to. "Sweetheart, this is going to follow her for years," he whispered, his voice trembling, his fingers tightening around the papers, as if he could somehow will them out of existence. "Insurance claims like this, the financial burden, this isn't just some small punishment. This is going to ruin her credit, her future, her ability to—" "To do what, Dad?" I interrupted, my voice sharper now, my patience wearing dangerously thin, my hands pressing against the edge of the table to keep steady, to keep coasting through life without consequences, to keep taking whatever she wants without worrying about how it affects other people, to keep letting you and Mom protect her from reality. Jimmy slammed her hands against the back of her chair, her jaw clenched, her entire body wound so tight I thought she might snap in half. "You're seriously acting like I killed someone," she snarled, her eyes burning with rage, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I made a mistake, okay? I took your car, I wrecked it. I wasn't kind about it. Fine, I get it, I screwed up, but you—" She gestured wildly to the papers in my father's hands, her expression twisting in frustration. "You went out of your way to make this as bad as possible for me." Something inside me flared at those words, something raw, something furious, something that had been simmering for years, but had never fully surfaced until now. I rose to my feet slowly, deliberately, my gaze locking onto hers, my voice low but unshakable, my anger cold and precise. "You didn't care when I lost something I worked for. Why should I care now that you're losing something?" The words hit her harder than I expected, knocking the breath from her lungs, her expression momentarily faltering, a flicker of something almost like regret flashing across her face. But it was gone just as quickly, buried beneath layers of entitlement, of anger, of the unwavering belief that I was the one being unfair. My mother exhaled through her nose, rubbing her temples like this was some exhausting inconvenience, like my refusal to cave was nothing more than an irritation. "Annie, I understand that you're upset, but this isn't right. We're family. We don't do this to each other." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head, my arms crossing over my chest. "We don't do this to each other." "That's funny, Mom, because Jamie had no problem doing it to me. And you had no problem letting her." Jimmy scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief, her hands gripping her hair like she was about to tear it out. "I don't have that kind of money," she muttered, her voice cracking just slightly, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "How the hell am I supposed to pay for this?" For the first time that night, I actually smiled, but there was nothing warm about it, nothing soft, nothing forgiving. "Figure it out," I said simply, turning my back on her, walking toward the door, refusing to look back, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing even a sliver of doubt in my expression. I heard my father call after me, his voice high with desperation, pleading with me to think this through, to be reasonable, to not let this tear the family apart. But I didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't hesitate. Jamie had taken something from me, and for the first time in her life, she was going to give something back, whether she liked it or not. Days passed, but Jimmy didn't call, didn't text, didn't try to reach out, and honestly, I wasn't surprised in the slightest because I knew exactly what she was doing. She was scrambling, panicking, trying to find a way out of the mess she had created, desperately hoping that someone, somewhere, would bail her out the way they always had before. I could picture her pacing in her overpriced apartment, running her hands through her hair, calling our parents every hour to demand that they fix this, just like they had fixed everything else for her in the past. Never once stopping to consider that maybe, just maybe, this was a problem too big for them to sweep under the rug. I knew my parents had money, but I also knew that they weren't rich enough to make $40,000 magically disappear. Not without making serious sacrifices, not without dipping into funds that were meant for their own security, not without shaking the foundation of their comfortable lives in a way that would make them deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. And if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that my parents despised being uncomfortable. The pounding on my door came 3 days later. I didn't even need to check the peephole to know it was her. The aggressive knocking, the impatient huff of breath on the other side, the sheer entitlement practically radiating through the wood was all the confirmation I needed. I took my time answering, letting her stew, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her wonder if I was even going to acknowledge her at all, letting her feel just a fraction of the frustration and helplessness that I had felt when she had stolen my car and wrecked it without a second thought. When I finally opened the door, I found her standing there, looking disheveled, the dark circles under her eyes more pronounced than usual, her normally cocky posture slightly hunched, her fingers twitching at her sides like she was barely holding herself together. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over my chest, my expression carefully neutral as I arched an eyebrow at her. "Something wrong, Jamie." Her jaw clenched at my words, her eyes flashing with something dark, something dangerous, something that looked an awful lot like a last-ditch attempt at control. "You need to undo this," she said, her voice low, tight, barely restrained. "I don't care what it takes. I don't care what you want from me. Just make this go away." I let out a quiet breath through my nose, shaking my head slightly, my expression unchanging, my patience non-existent. "It's done," I said simply, my voice steady, calm, unshakable. "You'd need a lawyer and about $30,000 to fight it, and we both know you don't have either of those things." For a split second, I saw something in her face crack, a tiny fracture in the carefully constructed mask of confidence she had worn for her entire life, a flicker of pure, unfiltered panic that she couldn't quite suppress. But just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by anger, by resentment, by the same defensive arrogance she always defaulted to when things didn't go her way. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh, running both hands through her hair before dropping them to her sides. Her shoulders tensed, her breathing uneven. "You seriously hate me this much?" she demanded, her voice rising now, her composure slipping with every passing second. "You seriously think I deserve to have my entire life destroyed over a towed car?" I tilted my head slightly, watching her with something close to amusement, something cold and detached and utterly devoid of sympathy. "You destroyed my car without a second thought, Jamie. Why should I care that I'm destroying your bank account?" Her hands curled into fists at her sides, her nostrils flaring, her entire body shaking with barely contained rage, her voice breaking under the weight of her own desperation. "This isn't fair, Annie. You're punishing me for something that was never meant to be this serious, something that wasn't supposed to ruin me. I made a mistake, okay? A stupid mistake. But what you're doing, it's cruel, it's calculated, it's insane." I felt my lips twitch, not quite a smile, not quite anything at all, just a small, satisfied acknowledgement of the irony of the moment, of the way Jamie was finally experiencing something she had never once considered before: accountability. "You'll figure it out," I said simply, shifting my weight onto one foot, my voice light, almost dismissive. "That's what you always do, right?" For the first time in her life, Jamie had nothing to say. I started to close the door, but before I could, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and I saw her face shift into something that almost resembled fear, her fingers fumbling to pull it out, her eyes scanning the screen with a mixture of confusion and dread. I leaned casually against the doorframe, watching as her expression darkened, her jaw tightening, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "What's wrong, Jamie?" I asked, my voice dripping with false innocence, my eyes never leaving her face. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something, but no words came out, just a sharp, uneven breath, just the sound of her own world crumbling around her. And I knew in that exact moment that she had finally gotten the message I had been waiting for her to receive, the one from her employer, the one informing her that her reckless behavior had raised concerns, the one explaining that her recent promotion was now being reevaluated, the one making it clear that her Golden Girl immunity was officially over. For the first time in her life, Jamie was well and truly alone. I didn't wait for her to look up at me, didn't wait to see the full scope of her realization, didn't wait to hear whatever pathetic excuse or desperate plea was bound to spill from her lips. I simply smiled, a slow, knowing, satisfied smile, and gently shut the door in her face.